In this video I will show you the details of the border installations of both the former Iron Curtain in Germany and the Berlin Wall. I will also talk about mines and self-firing guns at the border between East and West Germany. And I'll explain why there were no such devices at the Berlin border. Coming up. Hi there and welcome to another video of East Germany Investigated, the channel that dives into the fascinating history of a country that doesn't exist anymore, East Germany, also known as the German Democratic Republic. On this channel we'll unravel myths and share real facts about the country's history. Let's get started. The Iron Curtain between East Germany, also called GDR, the German Democratic Republic, and West Germany, also called FRG, the Federal Republic of Germany, had a total length of 1,393 kilometers. That's about 866 miles. And it ran from Priwall in the north to Prex in the south of Germany. Although the first wired fences and barriers between the two Germanies were installed already in 1945, shortly after the Second World War, in the years that followed it was still quite easy to cross the border illegally. Radical changes came in 1952. In order to stop the continuous outflow of refugees, the GDR took measures by issuing a new regulation about the order at the demarcation border. This regulation mentioned a 10-meter control strip directly at the demarcation line that was strictly forbidden to enter, and if you did, you would be arrested or even shot. Behind this, a 500-meter so-called protective strip, and after that a 5 kilometers deep restricted zone. Only with the right paperwork you could cross the border. People living in the protective strip or restricted zone got special permissions. If you would live in a protective strip, you would only be allowed outside your house during daytime. Also, forced resettlements took place of East Germans that lived close to the border. I will make a separate video about this as it is such an interesting subject on itself. However, as the border was not completely impregnable over its full length, the number of escapes was still high. If you were quick enough, you could still climb over the barbed wire fences and reach the west. This changed in 1961 when the Berlin Wall was built. As the Berlin Wall was much better guarded, more pressure came again on the border between East and West Germany, and as an extra measure, mines were installed. Between 1961 and 1983, more than 1 million mines were laid along about 800 kilometers of the border. Hundreds of refugees were mutilated and some of them bled to death in the minefields because no one could get near them to save them in time. In 1966-67, the border installations were again improved, and in 1971, self-firing systems were installed on the outer fence to the border with West Germany. The SM-70, where SM stands for splitter mine, contained 80 sharp steel splinters that would kill everyone within 10 meters when triggered. A later version of the fragmentation mine would contain 20 metal balls with a diameter of 8 mm that would be fatal up to even more than 20 meters. As a part of the GDR's plan to relieve political tension, all mines and self-firing installations were removed in 1984 and 1985. Over the years, the border installations had developed into a situation as follows. Starting at the left bottom, the actual border was marked with stones that looked like this. A few meters from the border you could find the GDR border posts that were painted black, red, yellow and all contained a plate like this. First these were made out of plastic and later they changed to aluminum to look a little bit more representative. Although the area up to the first metal grid was often referred to as no man's land, the border stones and posts make clear that this is actually wrong and this was already East German territory. Observed from the west side, the first fence, called Grenzsicherungszaun 1, Border Security Fence 1, was 3,20 meters high and made out of this material, impossible to get hold of with your hands and feet. The self-firing systems were attached to this fence. Behind the first fence there often was a trench that would avoid all possible escapes by car or all other kinds of vehicles. Then you had a 6-meter control strip made of raked sand so that traces could be detected easily. The strip was brightly lit at night. The patrol road, Kolonnenweg, mostly consisting out of perforated concrete slabs, served as means of transportation for the GDR border personnel. Good to know if you plan to visit the former border areas is that these patrol roads for the biggest part still exist. In the beginning, most watchtowers were made out of wood, but by the end of the 60s they were replaced by these concrete versions with an octagonal lookout placed on several rings at 6 or 11 meters above ground level. In contrast to the wooden towers, the concrete towers had heating and electricity. However, in case of stormy winds, all staff had to leave the tower. In the mid-70s, command posts were added. These towers, with a base of 4 times 4 meters, had 3 levels. Also, the round watchtowers started being replaced by 2 by 2 meter square ones, where the lookout was at 9 meters above ground level. At some locations, watchdogs were used as well, especially at locations with high risk of escape or where there was no clear sight. The last fence, so the first fence when coming from the east, was the so-called Grenzsignalzaun, the border signal fence, that separated the protective strip from the restricted zone. This fence was similar to the border security fence and was also a metal grid fence, but contained additional layers of barbed wire and a Y-shaped top that triggered an alarm when too much pressure was put on the wires. Also, cutting the wires would trigger an alarm. A modernized version of this fence included perforated concrete slabs embedded about 80 centimeters deep into the ground to avoid escapes by burying a hole under the fence. As mentioned, the restrictive zone could be up to 5 kilometers deep and you only could get access if you would live in the area or if you had a special permission. The border installations at the Berlin Wall were quite similar to the ones at the inner German border, especially in the more rural areas around West Berlin. The biggest challenge was of course the populated part of the city, where the border sometimes was just in the middle of a street. I'll come to the details in a minute. Important difference between the Berlin border installations and the inner German ones is that in Berlin there were never any mines or self-firing devices installed. There are 2 reasons for that. As I mentioned earlier, in the populated area of Berlin, the border strips were mostly very small, too small to have enough space for mines and so forth. If such a device would go off, it would almost certainly cause damage to the western part of the city as well. Which brings us to the second reason. An exploding mine in the middle of Berlin would have caused serious international protest, and this is not what the German Democratic Republic wanted. 4 generations of the Berlin Wall were defined. And when we speak of the Berlin Wall, we mean the vorderes Sperrelement, the front blocking element. It is the wall that you saw when standing in the west. The first generation is the wall as was built in the beginning after closure of the borders in August 1961. This wall was made out of bricks and concrete blocks that were meant to build houses. After a couple of months, some parts of the wall were fortified with thicker concrete slabs, because of some wall breakthroughs that had taken place. These fortifications are referred to as the second generation of the wall. The third generation came in 1968 and consisted of concrete plates with a tube fixed on top. This wall was more difficult to climb. The fourth generation, Border Wall 75, Grenzmauer 75, was introduced in 1975, having a couple of advantages. The prefabricated concrete elements, technical name UL 12.41, did not need a special foundation. This wall looked smoother and cleaner, which would positively contribute to its image, so they thought. It was even more resistant to breakthroughs. And it needed only very low maintenance. Also, this version of the wall had an asbestos concrete pipe on top to avoid getting grip while trying to climb over. Like at the inner German border, in Berlin you would find a lighted control strip, a patrol road, watchtowers and a border signal fence. The border area, and therefore the area of responsibility of the border soldiers, stopped at the so-called Hinterlandsicherungsmauer. This would be what the Berlin Wall looked like for East Germans, so it's 2 completely different pictures. By the way, East Side Gallery, a long piece of the wall that has now become a monument and piece of art that's definitely worth visiting, was in fact a hinterland wall, but built with elements of the front wall, the Border Wall 75, UL 12.41. The actual border at this location was the shore on the western side of the Spree River. On top of the border installations in the border area, there were also a lot of so-called Vorfeldsicherungen, the security measures in the area before the border area that was often a restricted area already. You can think of barred or bricked up doors and windows, extra fences and lamps. There's quite a variety of them, and I will soon make a separate video about this topic. One important last, but certainly not least point. The exact number of people that lost their lives at the inner German and Berlin border in the period between 1952 and 1989 is still under debate. But it's definitely more than 600. Including the Baltic Sea area and other borders, it's around 1,000 people that lost their lives. It was not without a reason that the border was often referred to as Death Strip. So now you know the ins and outs of the East German border installations. If you like this video, hit the like button and help to grow this channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching and see you next time.